Hello, and welcome to Talent Talks. Today, I am here with a couple of my colleagues from Joveo, and we're going to talk about Google changing its advertising policy. I have Shari and I have Shehzad. Both of you guys can wave. Shehzad's from our marketing team at Joveo, and Shari is a senior digital marketing specialist and really our Google expert. So, Shari, can you tell us what is changing at Google?
Sure. Thank you, Jen. Google has recently announced that their new advertising policies, right? So recruitment marketers will no longer be able to use certain personalized markers such as age, gender, marital status, and zip code for their ad targeting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I suppose that they're doing that because those are the most common ways that advertisers could potentially discriminate when they're placing job employment ads. Shehzad, any other thoughts on the impact to advertisers by removing these ways to target?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this goes back to a conversation that you and I were having the other day, right? There's a good side and a bad side to a change of this type and of this magnitude, right? On one hand, yes, these were some demographic markers that advertisers could use to potentially discriminate, but these were also markers that advertisers were using in the past to conduct diversity hiring. So I think the change is going to be a very, very big deal for recruitment advertisers using Google. It means potentially having to rethink your ad strategy so that, one, you're getting the same number of highly relevant candidates and hires for your job roles, but then also figuring out how you're going to do, for the marketers that were really using this for good, how are you going to figure out your diversity hiring strategy?
It's interesting. When I was prepping for this call, I was thinking, I would think that some people use that information for good intentions, but it's sort of like the superhero movies. Do we use our Google targeting powers for good or for evil? And I guess this really what it's doing is it's putting up some roadblocks, similar to what Facebook recently, maybe last year did. Shari, can you tell us, is this sort of the same thing that Facebook has already done and Google's just catching up, or are there some differences?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Facebook in the mid last year has announced the policy, but Google has already excluded some of the targeting in the past, like targeting based on sexual orientation or religion, etc., etc. And these are actually the new additions to their policy. Ensuring that everyone is doing the right thing in their targeting it in the advertising space.
And none of these really cause me great pause, right? Like, yeah, I get it, right? Good, not, it really forces us, if you weren't already really considering what those targeting parameters could do to your audience, this is putting some guide rails around that. But as I was looking through the information, one of the things that struck me as something that employers specifically are going to have to deal with is the zip code targeting. So does that mean that I can't say I can't target to a specific city or town? Does this stop me from doing that?
We do have zip code based targeting, but I think zip code targeting essentially focuses on geographic location, right? So this could be a proxy for race, as people of similar backgrounds usually cluster in the same neighborhoods, right? We know that job seekers are more likely to consider a job if they're if the job is basically closer to their location, right? So I think at least for a certain type of jobs, like for example nursing or manufacturing jobs or warehouse jobs, where the employee is essentially required to go to the job location, we can use a certain radius targeting for this, right? Like for example, you can target a 25-mile radius around Chicago, Illinois. right? So that is still possible.
That's really good. And I think that that allows us to still meet the needs of our business and their hiring needs without having the potential to maybe inadvertently target someone by a specific neighborhood. So if I'm understanding correctly, we could say target within a 20-mile radius of Chicago or something along those lines. That way we could make sure that candidates could commute in a reasonable distance. I think that that's, I think that that's workable for all of the TA leaders out on the call or out on viewing today. I think that they could work around that. Now, Shehzad, you really have a very interesting perspective because you work for a company that brings in candidates to jobs, but you also do the marketing for Joveo. How, if at all, does this impact how we target customers at Joveo potentially? Or does it?
Yeah, I think I think it doesn't really impact so the changes that Google has recently rolled out, right, apply to three different kinds of ads. They apply to employment ads, they apply to housing ads, and they apply to credit ads. So it doesn't necessarily affect us in terms of reaching out to our target audience, which essentially is staffing agencies, direct employers, RTOs, recruitment ad agencies, and job boards, right? So it doesn't affect us from that perspective, but we're definitely starting to see a lot of conversations and interest around or even concern around employers asking, how is this going to affect our recruitment marketing strategy? Or staffing agencies saying, how does this impact our pipeline of candidates, right? So I guess there are some changes in that direction, and also in terms of how when we assist our customers in running these campaigns, there are some changes there, but not directly from a B2B marketing perspective.
But that's helpful. And you bring up a really good point, right? So the reason that this was put into place is to sort of take a step forward in realizing the vision of equal opportunity for all, right? Like, so no discrimination. But that doesn't mean that we can't be laser focused and very smart about how we are targeting the right candidates for the right jobs. So why don't we start with you, Shari? Let's talk a little bit about audience, like affinity audiences. Is there some way that, like, instead of looking for somebody's, one of those prohibited factors that Google is removing, is there a way to sort of help fortify our funnel in the areas where we're trying to increase diversity without using some of those prohibited terms?
I think marketing is all about reaching the right audience at the right time. So we have several ways to do it, and affinity audience is one where we essentially target based on people's affinity, right? So these are the people with real interests, right? So if you take an example of a book lover or a digital marketing enthusiast or a dog lover, for example. So these are people with real affinity. So targeting those people and reaching them at the right is very, very crucial.
And it's interesting, right? It may cause advertisers, particularly for jobs, to get really focused on the cultural things that make for a good fit. And Shehzad, I'm gonna throw this one to you, and I'm not sure how this works, but is there a way to learn more about audiences and their affinity? Like, can you see, if we're tracking through the hire, can you see who we hired and maybe make some sort of lookalike audience that looks like them to kind of help with the diversity, or is that a little tougher to do?
Yeah, I think there's so I think first of all, I'd love to start with saying that I think the best of creativity happens when there's a set of constraints, right? And this is an opportunity to look beyond some of those standard markers that people have been using for more than a decade now. So affinity audience is definitely a good starting point, right? And let's kind of try to extend that concept into how we can evolve into looking at lookalike audiences. So affinity audiences could be a starting point, right? How do you understand what are the passions or interests that you care about? The way you can, for example, understand those is look at your rock star hires in the past, ask them specific questions around understanding them as people, and what are some of those nuances about their behavior that correlate with success in a particular job. So focus groups is a good starting point. Now you extend that concept to lookalike audiences, where you put in your data of hires that you've made in the past, and let Google kind of run its own algorithms and create its own audiences around that. So I think at the end of the day, you need to kind of experiment a little bit into seeing what works best for you. But there's certainly ways to go ahead and do that. And Google has some pretty sophisticated and powerful ad targeting capabilities.
Awesome. And the whole reason that an employer would probably be focused on this and looking for some strategies would be because they have an active diversity strategy, right? And so as I was preparing for this conversation, a few things that came to mind for me were things like gender neutral and diverse positive language. I would be interested in, Shehzad, your take on if that helps or if that matters. But as I was sitting there thinking about it, I thought, how many job descriptions or job advertisements do I see where the entire thing talks about he will be placing ads or he will be writing code, and the entire time, we use the he as opposed to a they or something more non-binary. Do you think that makes a difference either from an algorithm perspective or even just from a perception perspective, Shehzad?
Yeah, I think it's an extremely important point. If you don't have gender neutral language and sort of are just referring to the candidate as a he throughout your job ad or job description, I think that's extremely insensitive, right? And I do want to give the benefit of doubt to some employers that are probably they're probably not doing this intentionally, right? They're probably doing this because a lot of bias is implicit. And so, I'd love for them to go out there and check out some tools or some solutions that would help them with this cause, because I really think it makes a whole world of difference.
I absolutely agree. And Shehzad knows this because we've been talking about what sort of blogs and whatnot I'm going to create over the next few months. And one of the things that we were really focused on is how to write compelling job advertisements in a way that's gender neutral. So I think that there's some real value there. The last topic that I'd like for us to explore together is, okay, so it's happening, right? It may not have happened now, but Google has said that they're going to do this by the end of the year. And so the reality is, if you have an active diversity strategy that requires the reliance on targeting like we've talked about today, you may need to dramatically shift how you're placing your ads. And you'll also need to have a really good idea of what's performing well and what's not, right? Like we need to compare apples to apples. So Shehzad, can you talk to me a little bit about when we're comparing apples to apples? I've been really impressed with the Joveo platform, right? Like it allows you to track apples to apples, not only about your paid Google, but also your organic, your placements, your programmatic, your duration-based postings. So you can really sort of pull everything all together. Do you think that that's important in evaluating the diversity output of sources now that we're not able to target like we used to with Google?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, there's probably three variables that are perhaps the most important for anybody in our industry, right? And that's what is the hiring outcome? How many quality hires or high quality hires do you need to make? What is the time that you took to make these hires? And what is the cost that you invested per hire, right? And the ability to look at these metrics across all of your different channels, and sometimes even factoring in diversity, because there are job boards out there that allow you to hire specifically for and assist you in terms of diversity hiring. So I think looking at all of these metrics and really those down the funnel metrics, right? Those high quality applies, those hires across all of the different channels that you're using, whether it's Google or Facebook or job boards, organic channels, slots, duration-based postings. I think that is extremely powerful. And if you can, kind of consolidate all of that in one platform, as Joveo does, I think it would, not only would it contribute, in terms of diversity hiring and enable employers to maintain their robust candidate pipelines, but also I think it would make them extremely more productive and happy.
Yeah, I will tell you, as a TA leader, that was one of the biggest obstacles I had in sort of coming to an informed decision on what was working best, right? Like I was tracking organic in one bucket, I was tracking paid in another bucket, slots in another bucket. And so when you look across that, particularly if you're tracking all the way to hire and you can anonymize your race and gender so that you can see, how are those sources yielding for you? Not having them in one place sort of results in what I would call creative math. Right? Like, and HR people, I mean, I'm not throwing any shade here. Some of you may be great at math, but the whole reason that I got into HR and marketing was so that I didn't have to do math, right? So having everything in one place so that you can look across and just see what's yielding best seems to be a real differentiator and a benefit down the line as you're selecting new sources to get diverse candidates from. So thank you for that. So we're about at time. Before I close and recap, I want to throw it out to both of you. If there's anything about this topic that we haven't talked about today or any sort of gem you want to leave us with, here is the time to do that. And Shari, I'll start with you.
Google has a very interesting way where, all of this information is basically, all these people with all of these different interests are essentially grouped together based on their recent search activity or across all the Google platforms. So it's very, very powerful tool. In addition to that, like with the wake of this pandemic, a lot of people are working from home, right? And it is not necessary that for certain type of jobs, you don't really have to commute to the job location. So we still have the opportunity to work remotely for some of the jobs. And I think city-based targeting is something that we can look at. So it doesn't really matter where you are, right? Like all you need is a machine and internet to work. So I think we have tremendous opportunities.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, let's just be honest. We're all right now at our home offices, right? Across different time zones. And we work great. I mean, it's great. I think that's a whole nother show that we could talk about remote working and how that's helped and how that impacts recruiting, right? It's really interesting just as I watch customer service jobs that used to be really location specific. Like you've got to sit at 123 Sesame Street here. And now it's like work from home, right? So it really expands the pool and it makes it where we don't have to rely on the talent pool of an individual location in order to fill a role. So I think that that's a very exciting turn of events that's going to come from this. Shehzad, anything else that you would add?
Yeah, I think, I mean, from my perspective, I'd say that recruiters or talent acquisition leaders, I think the biggest asset that they have is their own unmined data, right? And so, just thinking about creative ways in which they can use this data to mitigate bias, to conduct diversity hiring, and then thinking of Google as a channel to kind of use some of that data to achieve their organizational objectives. I think there could be a lot of creative ways in doing that, and we're going to see a lot more of that in the future.
Totally. And as I like to sort of break it down, like what are the things that you can do right now, and then what are the things that you should think about. So as I sort of recap this conversation in my head, what should you do right now? You should explore affinity audiences, get very familiar with what that means, if there are some natural fits with either your occupation or your company. I think Shari said it great. Thoughtfully use your location, right? Like, could it be city based? Is it city based with a radius? Really understanding how to use that to your advantage. Also using neutral and diverse language. Like I said, non-binary language. It's really easy. They, we. It's a practice and not something that you'll be able to do right away, particularly if you're not writing all of your own job advertisements. But then the next level things, what are the things that we can do to kind of take it to the next level now that these changes are happening? I think the first one is mitigate bias with data. Understand, where are you hiring the appropriately represented talent pool, and where are you not? Where do you need to fortify? How do you do that? And then one of the biggest things for me is comparing apples to apples. Like I said, as a former TA leader, really being able to look at everything all in one place and understand what is most effective and what is, and effective can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. For some of you, it's probably cost. For others, it's probably quality. And for others, it may be time. It may be a combination of all three with different weightings. So just understanding and being able to compare apples to apples. And then the whole lookalike audience thing, identifying your past really good diverse hires, having focus groups, and really fortifying how you can target so that without using those potentially discriminatory items, you can still get really high performing results. I think that's sort of my takeaways for today. Is give me a thumbs up or a thumbs up or a wave if you have something to add. Thumbs up to get okay, good deal. This really isn't my sweet spot, guys, but I really feel like I've learned a lot, and I thank you both, Shehzad and Shari, for helping me kind of navigate and understand what this means to an advertiser, and particularly someone in talent acquisition. And I am certain that I will have you both back on a Talent Talk sometime in the near future. Thank you both.
Thank you, Jenn.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jenn.
Bye, guys. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.